First of all, I want to try to clean up some of the mess that has come out of this hearing, and I want to congratulate the witnesses for hanging in there with us despite this hearing going all over the road. First of all, in terms of the work requirements on the Farm Bill, it only impacts about 29% of the people who are on SNAP benefits at the time. It's age 18 to 59, so this idea of forcing the elderly to get a job is not applicable. It doesn't apply to people with disabilities or the elderly or for caregivers with children under 6 years old. There are waivers out of that. It increases the amount of assets that individuals can have. I mean, we haven't increased the value of an automobile since the 1970s, and that goes from, I think, $4,000 to $12,000. Because if people want to get a job, we want to be able to get to work. And when they get a job, they can continue to collect their benefits. And Mr. Gunderson, I appreciate your answers to the questions. I think what will reduce fraud, because most of it has to do with retailers, Mr. Roth, I believe. That's the biggest number I saw is about $1 billion. As the retailers, I think you're going to have bad actors regardless of the number of people you have on SNAP benefits. And it is an effective program. I grew up dirt poor. I get it. I mean, I lived in a house my dad built himself in a room that had cardboard between the two befores, that in a bedroom I shared with my brother. So I understand that people need a hand up, and I think this program has been beneficial. But at the same time, we want to encourage people to rise above their condition. That's not what the hearing's about. It's not about abuse, waste at the Department of Defense, although we had a hearing on that in March of 2017. We're looking into that. This is about reducing the amount of money that is lost in the program because of bad actors, fraud. And in many cases, particularly on the retail side, Mr. Roth, the retailers are taking advantage of people by offering them cash for their SNAP benefit card. They're taking advantage of people. I think that it's not just the loss of the money, it's what happens to the folks who give up that card. They're not buying food in many cases. Sometimes they're buying drugs. Sometimes they're buying lottery tickets. It's not benefiting them or their families. So that's what we want to try to focus on, is how do we eliminate the fraud. Mr. Bragdon, I apologize for the last series of questions directed to you. It's been my experience in the past, having run a think tank for 25 years, that when people start trying to undermine the legitimacy of your work by questioning who is contributing to your work, it tells me that you've already won the argument. And so I commend you for your work. With that, Mr. Roth, it was mentioned that if you want to get an idea about the trafficking of SNAP benefit cards, just go on Craigslist. Is there any way that in your investigations or into these that you've looked at a sting operation, any way to combat that type of fraud on Craigslist?
Yeah, we haven't seen a lot of the Craigslist ads in Maine. They've come up very sporadically, but it's a difficult operation to do. It requires, from a safety standpoint, extra investigators, but we do pursue those things when we have them. We've had some other tips come in from people that heard of people trading their cards, but again, those are very difficult investigations to make. We get a lot of allegations, but they're hard to work.
Is there, well, I've also heard that they advertise in papers for SNAP benefit cards and marketing them that way. But is there also cases where retailers are kind of networked in terms of what they're willing to offer, so that there may not be the same group, but they've reached some kind of an agreement that they won't pay more for a card than the other guy?
Ironically, we got a complaint from one retailer that the other one was undercutting him on what he would pay for the cards. So it does happen, believe it or not.
So wait a minute. What you're saying is one retailer literally turned themselves in by complaining that another retailer was offering more for the cards than they were.
Yes.
And they, well, that goes on another list. Mr. Bragdon, in your experience at FGA, Foundation for Government Accountability, what have you observed in terms of successful ways to reduce fraud?
I think one of the things is just at the state level, the verification of actually following up on individuals and requiring regular check-ins. I think that we all want people to move off the program, get back to work and out of poverty, and that requires a certain kind of engagement, both on the front door and on an ongoing basis by the state, and that's really key.
Yeah. I know the Inspector General's office has really focused on the retailer side of it. Have you looked into the data analytics to determine if that is helpful in reducing the amount of fraud? Ms. Coffey?
So we have, actually that's a critical piece of any of the investigations that we do. With the onset of the benefits being electronically available, we actually have a whole host of data that we're able to utilize for the purposes of data analytics to help us identify where potential fraud is occurring, how it's occurring, when it's occurring. And that really has given us an opportunity to really move forward on some of these investigations where prior to the electronic benefits, it would have been very challenging to try to pursue food stamp coupons.
Have you seen, in terms of the retailer trafficking, is that on the rise or is it fairly steady?
It's hard to say in terms of if it's on the rise. What I can say is we've initiated fewer investigations relative to retailer trafficking within the last year. Now, there could be any number of reasons for that, but it's difficult for us to say if it's on the rise.
Have you made recommendations to FNS in regard to ways to combat the trafficking?
There are a number of things that we've put forward to FNS that we're working with them on currently to basically identify where we've identified concerns. FNS is aware of that, and we're working to try to figure out the best way to address those concerns.
Have they implemented any of your recommendations?
We're not quite there yet, but I know they are definitely working on it.
I want to get back to how we close some of the loopholes. And I know the Foundation for Government Accountability has done a lot of work on that. And I've read I read all of your recommendations in your written testimony, but can you just highlight a couple of them that you think would really have the biggest impact, Mr. Bragdon?
Sure. I think just to punch the point and a stat that you started off the hearing with the increase in the number of prosecutions and administrative actions, this is an area where if you don't look, you won't see it. But if you do look, you'll see a lot of different things. I list off in the testimony 10 different areas. A lot of them have to do with the certification period, how long before somebody has to check back in. Life is dynamic, as you heard from the doctor. And so if people are on the program for a short period of time, but you're not checking in with them for a year plus, if they go back to work, that's not going to be caught. A lot of the federal databases that states are required to use are not regularly updated. So if states use their own data, they could have more real-time analysis. Even with the retailers, more than half of all stores that take EBT cards are convenience stores, and yet we know from the Congressional Research Service that only 9% of those stores are looked into, yet it's only 5% of total transactions, but it's 20% likely chance that each transaction is trafficking. And so this is an area where aggressive oversight from this committee and from the agencies is really key.
We've been talking about fraud, but we've also got the issue of the payment error rate nearly doubling. That's been a big issue with me, the improper payments issue. We sent out $141 billion last year in improper payments. Every agency, every program is required by law to report their improper payment rate, and I think for 2 years, the SNAP program did not report. I think they reported last year. But, Ms. Coffey, can you give us any idea of why that rate would have doubled?
Recently, our Office of Audit had done work relative to the quality control process, which helps in the calculation of the error rates, and had made several recommendations to FNS in terms of how to improve that particular calculation. My understanding is, and I would have to basically talk to my audit colleagues, that that's really the basis for what the changes you're seeing, that some of those, I guess, changes in the algorithms they use to calculate that information have been implemented, and so you're seeing an increase in the error rate at this time.
That is, you know, it's one of those things that having run a think tank and being into data and numbers, that when I first got here and got on this committee, and the Comptroller General came in and hearing and testified that we're sending out $141 billion a year in improper payments, that you have that moment where you think your head might explode. Considering that we're in a deficit, that's $141 billion that we had to borrow to send out improperly, and then there were 18 federal programs that didn't even bother to report. I think it's a huge issue. It's not only a fiscal issue for the federal government in trying to manage our fiscal situation, but it also, for instance, on Medicaid, $36.3 billion in improper payments. That's money that's not getting to the people that need to get it. Not to, again, reinforce the fact we had to borrow that money to send it out to somebody who's not supposed to get that money. And and some of that, not all of it, but a part of that was fraud as well. I think it's an issue that we need to crack down on, because we have an oversight responsibility to be fiscally responsible for the resources that we're putting out there. We have a responsibility to provide a program that maximizes the benefit to the people who need it. It's not about tax cuts for anybody or any of that. I mean, like I said, I grew up dirt poor. I'm thankful that there were wealthy people out there that started a business and were willing to give me a job, give me a chance to be the first person in my family to ever go to college. I've never been given a job by a poor person, to be just brutally honest. But at the same time, I have a very strong desire to see people do well, and to give people a hand up to help them get where they need to be, particularly those who are in the most difficult circumstances, the disabled and the elderly. So with that, I appreciate the witnesses for appearing before us today. The hearing record will remain open for 2 weeks for any member to submit written opening statement or for questions for the record. If there's no further business, without objection, the subcommittees stand adjourned.